Excellencias,
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I declare open the 9th meeting of the 76th plenary session of the Executive Committee. As you may know, yesterday evening we heard the last speaker on our list for agenda item 5, after listening to the presentation. So now we're going to open the floor to any delegation wishing to intervene on that item of our agenda.
En primer lugar, ofrezco la palabra.
First, I offer the floor to the distinguished representative of Zambia on behalf of the African Group.
Chairperson, thank you for giving me the floor. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Republic of Zambia has the honor of delivering this statement on behalf of the African Group of States. We thank UNHCR for presenting the 2025 report on evaluation and acknowledge the continued efforts to strengthen institutional learning and accountability. However, the African Group wishes to express concern over several substantive issues that limit the report's strategic relevance and operational impact. Firstly, the report provides limited evidence of measurable impact. While it references evaluation activities and thematic reviews, it does not present comparative data, baseline indicators, or trend analysis. Without these elements, it is difficult to assess whether evaluations are driving meaningful improvements or simply documenting activities and processes. Secondly, Chair, the report lacks regional specificity. In a year marked by significant structural transitions, including the closure of the UNHCR Bureau for Southern Africa, the absence of a detailed regional analysis is deeply concerning. The report does not reflect how much changes have affected evaluation capacity, field coordination, or protection outcomes in the sub-region. This omission, we believe, risks obscuring the challenges faced by states and their communities in Africa, and in particular Southern Africa, and undermines the principle of context-sensitive evaluation. Thirdly, Chair, the African Group notes the weak feedback loop between evaluation findings and programmatic adaptation. The report does not clearly demonstrate how lessons learned are being translated into policy reform, budgetary decisions, or operational adjustments. Moreover, the perspectives of affected populations and local partners and field staff are notably absent, raising concerns about the inclusivity and relevance of the evaluation process. Fourthly, the lack of a robust accountability framework is troubling. Recommendations are noted, but there is no clear roadmap for implementation, no timelines, no identification of responsible entities. This undermines the credibility of the evaluation function and risks reducing it to a procedural formality rather than a driver of reform. Finally, Chair, the report does not adequately address risk. In an increasingly volatile environment, evaluations must anticipate and respond to systemic threats, whether political, financial, or operational. The absence of risk analysis is a missed opportunity to strengthen resilience and preparedness across UNHCR operations. Chairperson, evaluation is not an end in itself, it is a tool for transformation. The African Group urges UNHCR to enhance the strategic depth, regional relevance, and accountability of future evaluation reports. We call on you for greater inclusion of field realities, stronger implementation follow-ups, and a renewed commitment to transparency and impact. This inclusion, we feel, will ensure principled and effective humanitarian action. I thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Switzerland. You have the floor. Thank you, President. Switzerland takes note with concern of the budget cuts that affect the work of the Evaluation Office. These cuts limit the number of evaluations it's possible to conduct. and makes it more necessary than ever to make strategic choices in identifying priorities that must serve as institutional learning and in particular guide the organisation. Similarly, the report underscores the importance of capacity building and decentralised evaluation on the ground and mentions a number of measures to this end, such as providing tools, training and other support. We believe it's essential to establish a practice-based community, gathering those that are working in the field and the evaluation office in order to share best practices and support one another. We should observe the effects of these measures and assess the impact on improving the quality of evaluation. In the context of UNHCR, other measures should be considered in order to promote sharing of evaluation services and capacity building for evaluation with national partners. The evaluation on decentralisation is timely when we consider the measures taken during restructuring. How do we take these recommendations into account when we look at the re-centralising of certain roles of the regional offices, and what will the impact of this reduction be on national and regional offices? In spite of strategic orientations, the policy for preventing gender-based violence lacks clarity, and its take-up has been limited. The reasons for this are the exhaustion of staff and the difficulties in funding and a lack of coherence. The application of such measures is often compromised by lack of resources. With the recent cuts, and in light of the finding that the administration does not always give satisfactory follow-up to the findings and recommendations of evaluations, how does the UNHCR intend to pursue the 8 recommendations from the Evaluation Office on this topic? And what about the follow-up for recommendations as to the call centres in the Middle East and North Africa? Evaluations on urgent action and national strategies demonstrate the importance for UNHCR to apply lasting response. The UNHCR must focus on its standard-based role and strengthening of national systems and focus on direct action on the ground as much as possible by using national systems. Finally, we would like to know how the Evaluation Office will contribute to the thinking process of the UNHCR vis-à-vis the new strategic directions from 2027 to 2032. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished speaker from the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, председатель.
Thank you, Chairman.
Всем доброе утро.
Good morning to all. We thank the Evaluation Office for the work carried out to improve the quality of programs and activities of the UNHCR. To what extent has the restructuring of the organization had an impact on the Evaluation Office? Is there any adaptation of these strategies planned to adapt to the new realities? We would ask the UNHCR leadership to comment to what extent the recommendations relating to the evaluation of the reform of decentralization has been carried out, and to what extent these conclusions are being used in the implementation. We note with satisfaction the inclusion of a report on the forecast for the future outlook. We expect that this will allow for a timely integration of prospects in terms of developments for evaluation. And that would include in the context of various reform initiatives. We would be grateful for your views on the way in which the results of evaluation activities are taken into consideration when developing and discussing reforms, in particular within the context of UNHCR. We would ask the Evaluation Office to consider the possibility of carrying out an analysis of the sustainable management of programs, as well as the reorganization of the UNHCR. And separately, we express our gratitude to the Evaluation Office for the publication of the key indicators of effectiveness. Thank you. Key performance indicators. This clearly improves the accountability and transparency of operations of the evaluation function. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking the Evaluation Office for their report. Independent evaluation provides vital insights to enable an organisation to learn and improve its impact and make sound, evidence-based decisions. It helps the organisation to maximise the value it achieves from every dollar. The UK values the important and insightful evaluations the Office has and is undertaking, as is reflected in this report. Given the key role the Office plays in building the evaluation approach and capacity across the organisation, it will come as no surprise, and you said the same in your opening remarks yesterday, Laurie, that as with all of the other issues we've discussed here this week, we're also concerned about the impact of cuts on the capacity of the Evaluation Office. As such, we take note of the reduction in staff as well as the number of evaluations, and thank you for commenting a bit more on this in your presentation yesterday, as well as your projection for 2026. We also want to acknowledge the progress made on the evaluation strategy. We appreciated the insights offered in the report on some of the important work done in respect of strategy implementation, including continued steps to build capacity across the organisation and consolidated efforts with other agencies and organisations, and we hope it will be possible for such initiatives to continue. We note the report states that a formal management process to systematically monitor and report on evidence-based decision-making has yet to be established, and timely management responses to evaluation recommendations remain a challenge. And we would urge management to work with the Evaluation Office to ensure improvements in this area and ensure that evaluations have the impact that they should. In closing, we reiterate our strong support for the work of the Evaluation Office and its vital contribution to strengthening UNHCR's effectiveness and accountability. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. There are no further requests for the floor, so I would ask Mr. Bell to respond to the comments made by the delegations. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you very much to Zambia and the Africa Group for their comments. I couldn't agree more that evaluation is not an end to itself, but a tool for transformation. With respect to information in the evaluation report, the global evaluation report on impact, baselines, data, trends, unfortunately, and this has to do with the lack of regional analysis, we're really limited to the amount of space that we have in the reports. This year, everyone was asked to cut their reports by 20%. Because of the cost, the high cost of translation into official languages. So you'll see that the annexes that usually accompany the report, the annex that of completed evaluations, of planned evaluations, and indeed the KPI table, key performance indicators, they're not in your reports. They're actually on our website. So if you noticed that they were missing, that's where you'll find them, and that was purely for financial reasons. So on regional analysis, we have actually just completed a regional analysis of evaluations in the Africa region, and I'd be very happy to organize a specific briefing with the Africa Group on this publication and some of the key learning. We have less evaluations in other regions. We have quite a few in the Americas, less in Asia Pacific and in MENA and in Europe. But we always reach out to member states. So Mauritania will remember that we had a briefing. They were involved from the beginning of the evaluation, the country strategy evaluation, right through to the end. And we had a briefing at the end between Mauritania and Geneva. Republic of Korea, we've had conversations right from the beginning of that country's strategy evaluation. So bilaterally, we're trying to keep member states informed about evaluations in their countries, but always happy to provide additional briefings. And on impact and data, I think you'll find that if you look into the individual evaluations themselves and often into the annexes where there's a lot more data, that you'll see that we're doing a lot to try and tease out where there's credible evidence, information on the impacts of UNHCR's work and the changes that it makes in the lives of people. A case in point would be the Mali country strategy evaluation recently, where we were able to use the results monitoring survey data to really tease out impacts in terms of increased access of displaced people to services, health, education, etc. On the translation of the recommendations into action, I think I'll leave that for said colleagues to respond to. But just on, there is actually a roadmap for the implementation of recommendations. Every evaluation has a formal management response, which is published beside the report, which indicates whether management agrees with the recommendation, fully, partially, or not at all, and the actions that they plan to take, and the deadlines for implementing those actions. What we are missing is not the management response. What we're missing is a system for knowing whether those actions actually happened afterwards. And then on risk, if you look at the evaluation policy, and this is where maybe the next version of the evaluation policy could be strengthened, the drivers of the topics that are selected for evaluations are not only about risk, it's also about ensuring that we have sufficient coverage of strategic directions, the 16 results areas, and I'll come back to the comment of Switzerland in a moment. And so the choice of topics is really led by a variety of factors, including, for example, consultation with member states earlier this year, consultations with the NGO community through ICFA, etc. But I think you're right that in the next version of the policy, we could look more at risk. Having said that, I think just two pieces of work to mention that completely respond to the issue of risk. Earlier this year, when the financial situation was becoming more evident, my office pulled together lessons learned from closing offices, from several evaluations, in order to provide a couple of key recommendations on what to think about as UNHCR scales down and in some cases closes offices. This is a risk. This is a risk for future partnership with national governments. This is a risk for UNHCR's ability to continue to protect refugees in the countries in which we have less presence. And the second piece of work that we've started just recently, and again, this was a topic that was proposed by member states during the consultation in Q1, and that's an end-to-end review of how UNHCR is managing tightly earmarked donor funding. Thank you very much for the comments from Switzerland. Yes, we're concerned also about the budget for the evaluation office. As the report said, we're quite a small team. There are 11 international staff, and we're now down to 8. We've managed to keep, in terms of regional support, we've managed to keep 3 regional senior evaluation officers who each cover 2 regions. So, for example, our colleague who covers Eastern Horn of Africa, Great Lakes, now covers Eastern Horn of Africa, Great Lakes, and Southern Africa. So we're doing our best with less capacity. We have a community of practice. It was set up 2.5 years ago with DSPR because, of course, M&E are very closely linked. So we have a monitoring and evaluation community of practice that exists co-chaired by DSPR and by the evaluation office. And we try to adopt a mentoring approach for all the staff who need to manage evaluations to be able to support and exchange practice between offices. I'll leave, again, the follow-up on the use of the DNR, decentralization and regionalization evaluation recommendations to others and the GBV as well. On the call center evaluation, that evaluation was just finished. The management response is it's not overdue. It hasn't been submitted yet. But what I can say is one of the reasons that my office was so keenly interested in this evaluation was the link between call centers and feedback loops with refugees and displaced people and UNHCR. and other initiatives that are ongoing at the moment, notably the digital gateway. So how are we making digital services available for refugees and displaced persons, stateless persons? How are we creating two-way communication channels? So we're going to do our best to lift some of the key recommendations from the call center evaluation, the multi-country evaluation in MENA, to look at the implications for broad global good practice. On strategic directions, if you look in the work plan, the published work plan, we indeed have a synthesis of evidence across the 16 outcome areas under UNHCR's current strategic directions. And we've already started, we're a little bit delayed, but we've already started that work focusing first on one outcome area 5, which is on child protection. But we'll work through all 16 areas over the coming 9 months with the idea of having a series of papers. For me, one of the key questions that these reviews need to look at is, what do our evaluations tell us about relevance of UNHCR's areas of action? Going back to, what do we need to do more of and what do we need to do less of? With respect to the Russian Federation, thank you very much for your comments. I think I've spoken a little bit to the impact of restructuring. In terms of adapting to new realities, and I mentioned this in my intervention yesterday, the Evaluation Office's budget has been, to some extent, subsidizing decentralized evaluations for project evaluations required by donors. And we will not be able to do that going forward. So in some cases, my budget has topped up funding for decentralized evaluations. My staff, who are primarily responsible for conducting global thematic and strategic emergency evaluations, are spending an enormous amount of time supporting decentralized evaluations. So I think one of the adaptations we need to make is to look at how do we make sure that project evaluations required by donors are fully funded, including the capacity to manage and implement them. And thank you very much for noticing the key indicator table in the report this year. It was a useful exercise for us to keep track over the last couple of years of how performance is evolving across the system. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora Bell.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bell. I offer the floor to Ms. Clements.
Chair, and good morning to everybody. Maybe just to follow up on a couple of the balls that the Director of Evaluation sent down to management. First, just to respond to the delegate from Switzerland, that I believe the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection mentioned yesterday the intention in terms of follow-up on the GBV evaluation. There will be a member state brief next month. I think she did also say that with regard to some of the budget cuts, how heavily impacted that particular sector is, and our deep concerns about that. But that is something that I think we will want to have a very intensive conversation to go back to some of the comments made by the High Commissioner and others on the podium during this week, and we've heard that in the room as well, but we'll follow up very closely on that. I wanted to respond to the comments in terms of how the decentralization and regionalization evaluation has impacted the review and the restructuring. This was discussed a little bit in standing committee, both in the summer and then as well in September, but for the benefit of this committee, it heavily influenced how we approach the review, and perhaps one of the more important documents that guided. What we have tried to do in terms of this very difficult review and restructuring is to ensure that the core principles that establish that decentralization, particularly to ensure the region and context-specific nature of the way that we have devolved decision-making closer to the people that we work with and for, does not change. And so to that extent, in terms of how we will move forward and where we have put capacity in terms of, as we call it, the three different levels between operational, representative, sub-office level, regional bureau, and then headquarters, that we've tried to maintain that very clear distinction. Where we are seeing, because of how severe some of the cuts have been, is the specific technical capacity that we had hoped very much to have that context specific embedded in some of the operations, or if that was not possible at the regional bureau level, we are finding now, as we're doing the gaps analysis and the like, that a lot of that capacity is no longer possible to retain at the level of operation, or in some cases even at the regional bureau level. So we will have to do more of that from the headquarters level, and even that I think will be quite strained if I'm honest. But if, as we embark again on what the 2026 detailed planning looks like, we will continue to use that decentralization, regionalization, evaluation very much as our bellwether of how we move forward. As we're rolling out, for example, global shared service, and the way that we help to support that operational delivery through HR, IT, supply, finance, for example, just in terms of modeling, there will not be a change to what we will be delivering in terms of the kind of capacity from those enabling functions. But it's the how that changes. It's that transactional processing that changes in terms of this review, and particularly that rollout, which started on October 1st. But we'll continue to keep this committee apprised as to how we're using, as we do all evaluation outcomes, very practically next steps. And I just wanted to flag, Mr. Chair, the final point that the Director of Evaluation made on call centers and how heavily that has influenced the rollout of what could be one of the most transformational components of our engagement with refugees, which is the digital gateway. And there is a direct correlation between the two. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clements. That brings us to the end of item 5 of the agenda. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we'll now move on to item 6. Under this item, the committee has before it UNHCR's programme budget for 2026, contained in A/AC96/76/5. Also relevant to the discussion is the report of the Advisory Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Questions, ACABQ, A/AC96/76/6. I would like to remind delegations that the programme budget was initially reviewed at an informal consultative meeting on the 26th of August, as well as at the 94th meeting of the Standing Committee in September. You also have before you the text of the draft general decision on administrative, financial and programme matters, which was discussed in an informal preparatory consultation on the 5th of September. I would like to welcome to the podium the Chief Financial Officer and Controller in the Division of Resources Management, Mr. Hans Barrit, as well as the Rapporteur of the Executive Committee, Ms. Lisa Advani. As the Deputy High Commissioner already made comments on the programme budget 2026 under agenda item 4B, we will move straight into the discussion. Therefore, the floor is now open for any delegation wishing to intervene on this agenda item. First, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda, speaking on behalf of the African Group. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Uganda is honored to deliver the statement on behalf of the African Group. We specifically thank the UNHCR DHC for your eloquent sharing of the update on budget and funding, and also the program budget for 2026. Africa, as a host to over 50 million persons of concern to UNHCR, remains very interested in the budget of the UNHCR and therefore from the outset supports the adoption of the budget decision of 2026 by consensus. We are, however, concerned that with only 2 months or maybe 3 to the end of the year, only 30% of the budget has been raised, and Africa remains the most underfunded, unfortunately. At this ExCom, therefore, Chair, our statement will focus on the call to all member states to share the growing burden and responsibility of protecting refugees. The growing budget deficits amidst the growing humanitarian needs defeats the principle of burden and responsibility sharing that is enshrined in the Global Compact of Refugees. The responsibility of assisting and protecting refugees was never envisaged to be for a select few states. It is our collective responsibility. And this is why, out of all UN agencies, we believe the reason why the High Commissioner for Refugees is appointed by the General Assembly and is indeed required to annually report to the General Assembly symbolizes the global duty of his mandate. And we therefore call for all of us to have and support the mandate of the High Commissioner for Refugees. In that vein, the Africa Group is proud of the part that we are playing. The in-kind contribution of land, infrastructure, services and security have an unmeasured monetary value that should remind all our partners that the burden we shoulder is equally heavy and should be shared. That said, we appreciate our partners that remain committed to donating in a timely, predictable and sustainable manner towards easing the burden on the hosting countries. We are even more grateful to the donors that provide an earmarked and flexible funding that has enabled timely response to the most in need. Chair, considering the growing burden on hosting countries amidst the declining funding, we cannot continue business as usual. We must prioritize finding durable solutions. This will require us to address the root causes of forced displacement, silence the guns, and stop fueling conflict, and then show up later as a matter of humanitarian intervention. To the UNHCR, we call for a more efficient way of doing business. We know you're doing your part, but we can do better. Address all the leakages that could result from duplication of services from your multiple partners. The UNHCR should also refocus, make sure the mandate and ensure savings to spend more on persons of concern than the administrative costs. We also call for a rethink on the human resource model of the UNHCR. The percentage of regular staff vis-à-vis affiliate staff should be revisited and maximize on flexible contracts that will save the organization large sums of money spent on terminal benefits. Whereas the African group appreciates that the UNHCR mandate is delivered indeed through staff personnel, we note with concern that a big percentage of the budget services salaries of UNHCR and its partners. This is unsustainable. We are further concerned that less than 17% of the budget is spent on the actual interventions to persons of concern to the UNHCR and opportunities that will empower refugees like self-reliance and to become financially independent are left empty. How then will we be able to achieve self-reliance? Turning to the recent staff cuts and closure of some offices amidst the financial crisis, Chair, we appreciate and sympathize with the difficult position that the High Commissioner had to take or was forced to operate in. And we assure you of Africa's commitment to work with you to deliver better amidst the tough conditions. However, of significant concern to the African group is the decision that was taken without prior consultation of the affected member states to close the Regional Bureau of the Southern Africa, effective of 1st October 2025. The Regional Bureau of Southern Africa has always been the least funded, and in our view, its closure would not have significant savings. Going forward, we call upon the UNHCR to provide sufficient support to the multi-country offices in the region to ensure continuity in the work that was being done by the Regional Bureau of the Southern Africa. Finally, Chair, the African Group reiterates the call for equitable and burden responsibility sharing in addressing concerns of persons to the UNHCR and reassure the High Commissioner, Mr. Filippo Grandi, of our commitment to support the execution of your mandate. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Zambia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Zambia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished delegate from the Republic of Uganda. Zambia has been a committed partner of UNHCR in hosting refugees and asylum seekers. However, over the past 5 years, a more than 40% reduction in UNHCR funding, exacerbated by global humanitarian budget cuts from key donors like the United States, has severely strained our capacity to sustain essential services in education, healthcare, livelihoods. Amid rising global displacement, economic challenges, and shifting donor priorities, refugee response budgeting has become increasingly unpredictable, making international burden sharing not only important, but urgently necessary. Chairperson, Zambia has made substantial government-led investments in refugee protection, demonstrating the true national responsibility and solidarity. Annually, the government allocates over 4.1 million Zambian kwacha, equivalent to about $147,000 to refugee programs, and deploys public service personnel such as teachers, healthcare workers, social workers, agriculture extension officers, and police to refugee hosting areas to deliver essential services to both refugees and host communities. Our vision for refugee protection in Zambia is grounded in inclusion, dignity, and long-term solutions. Today, refugees in Zambia receive free legal documentation, including birth certificates that not only affirm their identity, but also safeguard their rights under the law. We have extended universal health coverage to refugee populations, ensuring that even the most vulnerable, such as those over 60 years of age, receive free health care just like Zambian citizens. And in education, refugee children are now fully integrated into Zambia's free education policy, removing financial barriers that once kept many out of the classroom, and giving them a fair chance at a brighter future. Chairperson, however, these gains are now under serious threat. Over the past 5 years, Zambia has experienced a more than 40% reduction in UNHCR funding, compounded by a global cut in humanitarian assistance from major donors. This has placed tremendous strain on our ability to sustain essential services, particularly in health, education, and livelihoods. The impact is most visible in transit centers in Maheba refugee settlements, where new arrivals are now receiving no food assistance or basic necessities, no hygiene kits, no shelter materials, not even most immediate and life-saving supplies. The situation is not only unsustainable, it is quite frankly inhumane. Without urgent and predictable international support, we risk eroding years of progress. While Zambia appreciates the support from donor partners, it urges more timely and adequate funding. With UNHCR failing to raise the total amount for 2025, this situation is particularly worrying for Africa, which hosts over 50 million persons of concern. Zambia also expresses concern over the unconsulted closure of the Southern Africa Bureau and the absence of a dedicated allocation for the region for the 2026 budget. Clarity is sought on how Southern Africa's needs will be addressed under the East and the Horn of Africa framework, especially as the region has historically received the least funding. Chairperson, Zambia remains committed to protecting refugees but cannot bear this responsibility alone. We urge UNHCR and the international community to increase predictable, long-term funding for protracted refugee situations, prioritize sustainable integration programs to reduce reliance on emergency aid, and ensure equitable burden sharing so frontline countries like Zambia do not carry a disproportionate share. Chairperson, in conclusion, Zambia is doing its part, but we must not be left to do it alone. Solidarity must be matched by support, and global responsibility must translate into real investment. Together, let us protect the progress we have made and build a stronger, humane refugee response system for all. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Uganda in the national capacity.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to come back in my national capacity. My government, my delegation aligns with a statement of the African Group delivered by Uganda. Yes, we all need to smile on this day. Chair, the budget of the UNHCR has in the recent past generated a lot of interest, and like you all know, it's of paramount interest to my government. We are interested in the budget of the UNHCR not because it's the Uganda government budget. That would be for Parliament, and that's where we would flex our muscles. In these streets of multilateralism, where we are allowed to put on our good suits and speak good English and convince each other in the most diplomatic manner to explain what happens in our backyard where not many of you sit, that's what becomes interesting and tough for us. So in this item, we'll focus on two things: to explain why it's important to adopt the decision of the budget by consensus, and why it's important for member states to donate and share the burden through flexible contribution, and why it should be timely and predictable. On the consensus point, the budget of the UNHCR is called a needs-based budget. Needs meaning it's the needs of the refugees to eat, to sleep, to get shelter, to go to school. For us, if we ever have to doubt or question that, would mean to question the needs, to question whether the hosting countries are even delivering those needs. And that's why we remain very committed and thank all member states that remain committed to supporting this decision of consensus. To the burden and responsibility, especially through donating flexible funding, the UNHCR that we often put on a very tough wall, and Uganda has done that, we sometimes ask you for the impossible. Yes, we expect you to be very efficient in whatever you do, and we call on you to do that. We think you could do better in your human resource model, and we share that view. However, the member states also have a big role to play. When we donate fixed or earmarked money, we ask the UNHCR to explain what is unexplainable. I think member states today need to think, like my minister said on the first day, if you're earmarking your contribution, you're asking hosting countries to earmark who we host. If you say your money is for GBV or your money is supposed to go to a specific region, a region that has got an emergency and needs immediate intervention is stuck and cannot benefit from this budget. And when we come and speak roughly or very seriously to Mr. Filippo Grandi and ask him why his budget is not delivering, I think we are pushing forward double standards. We are asking you what you cannot do. And for this, I want to appeal to member states, to colleague states, that we need to do our part and share and contribute flexible, timely funding, and then hold them responsible on that part. On the bit of burden and responsibility sharing, the African statement was very clear on this. Hosting countries have done so much. We continue to keep our borders open. We continue to share the little. Our fragile infrastructure has been torn. Our borders are very porous and fragile, and yet we have not prioritized defense. We have not prioritized our nationals or our citizens' interests. We have prioritized humanity. And today we appeal to everyone under this budget item that if we can support the UNHCR budget with flexible and earmarked, predictable and multi-year funding, you will be prioritizing humanity, and humanity feeds into security, and it guarantees your defense. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of the USA. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy High Commissioner, for your presentation, your earlier presentation on the program budget. UNHCR plays a vital role in addressing the growing challenges of global displacement, and it is for this reason the United States supports the adoption of the 2026 budget by consensus. Colleagues, the persistent gap between UNHCR's approved budget and actual income remains, however, a significant concern. While we welcome the agency's recent structural reforms, measures thus far have been insufficient to address the widening gap between UNHCR's approved budgets and the resources it can truly raise. We urge UNHCR to present a 2027 budget that is realistic, achievable, and prioritized. This means clearly identifying and focusing on core mandate activities, particularly life-saving interventions and solutions to displacement, while defining what activities will be scaled back or discontinued. It also requires aligning the budget with realistic resource projections to avoid overpromising and underdelivering. Furthermore, UNHCR must engage donors early in the budget process to build confidence. The time for wishful budgeting is over. UNHCR must demonstrate discipline, accountability, and a genuine commitment to reform. Only then can we build a humanitarian system that is sustainable, effective, and capable of meeting the challenges of our time. For decades, the United States has shouldered a disproportionate share of the global humanitarian burden. This model is unsustainable and unfair to American taxpayers. The time is right for change, and we can do better together. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ethiopia aligns itself with the statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the Africa Group. Mr. Chair, Ethiopia reaffirms its firm commitment to the Global Compact on Refugees, grounded in solidarity, responsibility sharing, and protection for those forced to flee. Yet, the current funding situation falls short of these shared goals, with the resources declining as needs continue to rise. We must ask, what is being done to ensure donor countries honor their commitments? Again, we must ask, how is UNHCR exploring new and innovative funding sources to ease the growing pressure on host countries and host communities? Mr. Chair, funding for Ethiopia has consistently fallen short, with this year marking the lowest coverage in recent years, only 27% compared to 30 to 56% over the past decade. This funding gap has serious humanitarian and protection impacts. In addition, forcibly displaced children face heightened risks of abuse, neglect, violence, and trafficking, while gender-based violence remains widespread. 36% of female refugees experience abuse at home, and 40% of respondents justify violence against women and girls. Persons with disabilities, which takes 60% of refugees, lack access to specialized services. Health centers are overcrowded and under-equipped, with shortages of medicines, vaccines, and power. Poor wash services, including only 24% latrine coverage and 14 liters of water per person per day, contribute to malnutrition rates reaching 27%. Education is underfunded, leaving 45% of pre-primary, 58% of primary, and 2% of secondary school age children out of school, with class sizes up to 1 teacher per 120 students. 67% of refugee households lack adequate shelter, and only 43% of refugees are in the labor force, with nearly half unemployed, resulting in 75% living in poverty. Resettlement quotas have dropped to just over 1,000 this year, reducing durable solutions. You have 5,000 refugees want to return home voluntarily that demand adequate return and reintegration support. Access to electricity is low only 7% have grid access, 3% off grid, while 90% rely on firewood, driving deforestation and environmental damage. The funding shortage undermines protection, education, health, livelihoods, and the sustainability of refugee and hosting communities. Additionally, our inclusion roadmap, Makatat roadmap, for refugee depends on sustained, multi-year, and multi-partner financing is now at risk due to the unpredictability of available funds. Mr. Chair, Ethiopia calls on all partners to work together to help refugees become more self-reliant. Lasting solutions need better planning, local action, and stronger support from development actors, financial institutions, and the private sector, not only from UNHCR and hosting countries. We must ensure that progress achieved is not reversed because of funding shortages. In conclusion, Ethiopia thanks all partners who continue to give timely, reliable, and flexible support, especially those providing earmarked funds that help us respond quickly to urgent needs. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Denmark. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Denmark supports the adoption of the budget proposed for 2026 and agrees with Uganda on the importance of adopting the budget with consensus. We also share the concerns about the proposed cuts to UNHCR's 2026 budget as expressed by several member states this week. The forecasted 20% reduction will impact UNHCR and those it serves not only in 2026, but in years to come. This situation, it is imperative to focus efforts and resources where they matter the most. UNHCR's core protection mandate is unique and cannot be managed by other agencies. We therefore note with appreciation that, despite the forecasted 20% budget cuts for 2026, funding for protection-related outcomes is upheld. We call on you to ensure that this remains the case once funding becomes available. The starting point for proper prioritization is obviously a thorough understanding of actual needs across all displacement situations. However, with uncertainty at unprecedented levels, it is more important than ever that the process is guided by a realistic assessment of available financial resources and capacities across the organization, along with a clear strategy that sets a coherent course for the entire organization. Further, we encourage UNHCR to engage in a close dialogue with member states as the strategy is set and as priorities are determined and budgets adjusted accordingly. This will help inform decision-making and sound risk management. We recognize that this is a challenging task under the current circumstances, but it is all the more important while awaiting the new High Commissioner's arrival and as cuts are enforced at all levels, leading to uncertainty internally and challenges in partnerships. These approaches will help ensure the required stability and direction when the all-important process to revamp and reform the budget is initiated in preparation for 2027. This will be a crucial part of making UNHCR fit for purpose in a rapidly changing world. Denmark stands ready to continue engaging closely with UNHCR in this process. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first echo Uganda's plea for more flexible funding. We need flexible funding more than ever. Host countries like Uganda and Ethiopia, who just spoke before me, are taking their responsibility. So let us donors do our part. As we mentioned in our national statement, the Netherlands is proud to remain a committed multi-year unearmarked donor. Chair, the Netherlands would like to express our strong support for the programme budget for 2026. As the High Commissioner said on Monday, we cannot afford it not to have a budget, or to have a budget without full support. Let's keep UNHCR's persons of concern in mind in this context. Without the budget, what are we going to do for them? The budget is in our collective interest, to all of us in this room and beyond. Chair, related to the budget, the Netherlands would like to underscore our strong support for the long-standing principle of consensus-based budgetary processes in humanitarian fora. We strongly oppose any challenge to this principle, including through any reconsideration of textual proposals that have not previously received support. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now offer the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Chairperson, Your Excellencies, High Commissioner Mr. Filippo Grandi, distinguished delegates, thank you for giving Zimbabwe the floor. Zimbabwe aligns with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the African Group. Chairperson, we express our appreciation to the UNHCR for preparing the comprehensive report under this agenda item. We take note with deep concern of the shrinking funding space, which has been reductions in budgetary allocations in areas of critical importance to our region. The trend in the UNHCR budget cycles in the last few years has seen a widening gap between humanitarian needs and available funds, and this year's situation is further compounded by the financial crisis that has affected the entire UN system. Chairperson, it is at such a time of severe financial strain that we need alternative ways of mobilizing resources. As a host country negatively affected by the impact of unilateral coercive measures over the years, Zimbabwe has been implementing self-reliance programs with the support of the private sector to build resilience among refugees. Among several other initiatives, the government of Zimbabwe has availed a 175-hectare irrigation scheme benefiting over 470 households at Tongogara refugee settlement, and has to date availed over 8,000 metric tons of cereal in response to the call for humanitarian assistance by the United Nations General Secretary. Chairperson, Zimbabwe has and will continue to work with the resources at her disposal in order to meet our international obligations. We appreciate the financial donors who continue to avail an earmarked and a flexible funding to enable UNHCR to respond to emergencies and the crisis situations. We equally call upon the international community to help ease the burden shouldered by hosting states, many of whom are from developing countries. Finally, concerning the implications of the closure of the Regional Bureau for Southern Africa and the downsizing of operations to national offices, Zimbabwe looks forward to working with the UNHCR to ensure continuity in operations and uninterrupted support in refugee protection. We call upon the UNHCR to ensure the continued employment of staff in the national offices, including those being currently supported by UNHCR, and request that the multi-country office be adequately capacitated. In conclusion, Chairperson, we support the adoption of the Programme Budget Report for 2026 by consensus. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Germany.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President.
Mr. Chair, we thank UNHCR for its efforts in formulating and presenting the program budget for 2026. No small task given the unprecedented funding crisis faced by the organization and the wider humanitarian system. Germany is deeply concerned about the immense financial strain UNHCR is under. Global needs are rising, yet the funding gap has grown wider than ever. The overall 20% reduction in the program budget for 2026, despite record needs, reflects the extremely difficult choices that had to be made in hyper-prioritizing activities and beneficiaries. These are not just figures on paper. Each cut represents unmet needs and people in urgent need of protection who will ultimately pay the price. Mr. Chair, in these dire circumstances, part of the solution lies in moving forward with strategic reforms that make the humanitarian system leaner, more efficient, and better equipped to deliver for those most in need. Germany has been a strong advocate and partner of such efforts. As the current chair of the OCHA Donor Support Group, we have placed the humanitarian reset at the center of our agenda and are actively contributing to its advancement. In this process, UNHCR must continue to play a central role as one of the key operational actors of the humanitarian system. Mr. Chair, for many years, Germany, together with a handful of other major donors, have carried a large share of humanitarian and UNHCR funding. We have done this out of conviction of our historic responsibility and commitment for the multilateral system and rules-based international order, a commitment that we maintain. But we have long warned that this model is unsustainable. Today, we see the consequences of over-reliance on a small number of donors, many of whom are now facing their own budgetary constraints and are forced to reduce contributions. It is therefore more urgent than ever to broaden and diversify the donor base. Germany calls on all partners with the capacity to do so to step up and share the financial responsibility of meeting the protection needs of millions worldwide. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We are grateful to the UNHCR leadership for the draft program budget for 2026 in difficult financial circumstances. We are aware of the importance of the activities of the UNHCR and the need by member states, and express our full support to the program and budget aspects contained in the report. We expect that next year the UNHCR, in close cooperation with member states, will discuss whether the methodology for assessing the financial needs is adequate, and will also provide for consideration various options for calculation and their actual workability in the activities of the UNHCR. We also express a renewal of the discussion on the budget period within the UNHCR. In addition, the Russian Federation has proposed 2 amendments to the draft general decision, and we expect to return to this consideration in greater detail a little later in the agenda. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Kenya. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Distinguished delegates, we gather amidst a lot of shifts and uncertainty in the multilateral space. If there was a time when collective action ought to be stepped up to address the challenges we collectively face, that time is now. Regrettably, the opposite is the case, and that is a major concern. Amidst the uncertainty and abrupt fiscal alignment, Kenya reiterates that funding humanitarian work is crucial and saves lives. Certainty, predictability, and adequacy remains crucial to ensure continuity of life-saving humanitarian work, as noted by the distinguished representative of Uganda in the African Group statement. In that regard, Kenya supports UNHCR's appeal for an earmarked funding. However, resources available to UNHCR must be utilized prudently. We thank all financial donors who give flexible contribution to UNHCR, and more so those who give the organization an earmarked funding, giving the organization the necessary agility to address emergencies whenever and wherever they occur. The present budget cuts threatens to create new crises. They threaten to prolong protractedness of conflict and to increase displacement. This has a very disproportionate burden on host countries and broader neighborhoods. As noted yesterday in Kenya National Statement, the reduced food rations and the differentiated assistance model for refugees hosted in Kenya have led to protest. We urge the UNHCR to urgently engage with partners, including partners in the development sector, on food security and in broader chain to activate livelihoods. We are concerned that the cuts in crucial sectors like education threatens to expose more children and young people to recruitment to armed groups and terrorist organizations, thus amplifying insecurity and creating more displacement. It also robs them of their livelihood and their futures. Cuts to water, health, and sanitation pose possible public health risks, which might affect the wider population beyond the refugees. The funding cap for 2025 stands at a very disturbing 62.9% at a time when humanitarian needs are at an all-time high, with the number of persons projected at 136 million in 2026. It's important to uphold solidarity and collective action to address our common challenges. We would like clarity on the 2026 budget being 2 billion lower, while the needs are projected to be higher. For the Eastern Horn of Africa and the Greater Lakes region, Kenya continues to call for attention to optimal resources of Impact Area 4 on solutions. We take note of the very modest 2% increment in Impact Area 4 for 2026. Kenya has affirmed in previous briefings the necessity of ensuring resourcing of solutions. We urge UNHCR to ensure a balanced and prioritization of financing solutions across all regions in collaboration with relevant partners to ease pressure on host countries and to facilitate voluntary returns and repatriation. Amidst the steep fiscal cuts, the pivot to sustainable responses must not place extra burden on host countries. We call for their attention and resourcing climate action as applicable to an UNHCR mandate, noting the immense environmental impacts of protracted hosting of refugees in Kenya. Ultimately, addressing the root causes that drive major humanitarian crises is essential, including working on peace. Peace remains a core foundation to prevent most humanitarian situations. In addition, there is no development without peace, and no peace without development. I thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of New Zealand. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand supports the adoption of the program budget for 2026 by consensus. Like others, we acknowledge the extremely challenging situation UNHCR is facing due to an underfunded budget. We welcome and encourage UNHCR's focus on prioritising funding to its core work and its efforts to reinforce accountability, as well as its participation in reform efforts under the Humanitarian Reset and UN80. As a committed multi-year and flexible funder, New Zealand encourages others to do the same to ensure life-saving assistance can continue to reach the most vulnerable. We stand ready to support UNHCR on its transition journey and work towards a sustainable budget in 2027. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Burkina Faso. You have the floor. President, my delegation aligns itself with the statement given by Uganda on behalf of the African Group, and in our national capacity would like to raise a few concerns. First, I should like to convey to the High Commissioner all of the gratitude of the government of Burkina Faso for the constant support that the country has received from the UNHCR in implementing its policy for hosting and protection. As we've heard many times over this session, the serious crisis that is gripping the humanitarian sector is affecting our shared organisation and compelling it to make some very difficult choices in terms of restructuring. At this stage, there's no point in demonstrating the negative impact of these budget restrictions on caring for the people affected by the crisis, but also, of course, it goes without saying that this affects the UNHCR staff that continue to feel the impact of these restrictions. I express all the solidarity of my country, Burkina Faso, and my delegation remains particularly concerned at the successive restrictions to the action of UNHCR in 2025 and the announced reductions in 2026, which may jeopardize the operational capacity of the organisation in our country. And yet, a reduction in the operations of the UNHCR could endanger the implementation of the National Integration Strategy for Refugees, which is a roadmap that conveys the commitment of the highest authorities of the country to implement lasting solutions for refugees. President, in cooperating with the UNHCR country office, my country has taken steps to protect IDPs according to the domestication process of the Kampala Convention, and furthermore in implementing the National Action Plan to combat statelessness. These endeavours deserve support to guarantee the implementation of the legal framework and lasting protection for displaced people exposed to vulnerable situations. Continuing support for the UNHCR and looking at the contributions of Burkina Faso is essential in order to ensure that we can curb the flow of displaced populations to neighbouring countries. President, in spite of a difficult security and economic context, Burkina Faso has remained faithful to its international commitments in terms of hosting and international protection. However, in a spirit of solidarity and burden sharing, we would call, on the one hand, for appropriate budget allocation based on the reality on the ground, and furthermore preserving the operational capacity of the UNHCR in Burkina Faso and in other countries within the Sahel. I firmly believe that maintaining a robust operation that is financed by the UNHCR will contribute, but in Burkina Faso and further afield, to the stability of the sub-region, and will also take into account the interconnected humanitarian challenges that we are facing. I thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of Sudan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Sudan aligns itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the African Group. We'd like to begin by expressing our deep concern over the unprecedented financial crisis facing the multilateral humanitarian system, which has severely constrained the ability of UNHCR and its partners to deliver on their mandates. This financial pressure comes at a time when humanitarian needs are escalating globally. For Sudan, it means that life-saving interventions are being scaled down precisely when our people and 1 million of refugees that we continue to host need them the most. The situation is further compounded by the unilateral coercive measures imposed on Sudan, which restrict access to financial systems and impede the government's ability to sustain essential services for refugees and host communities, despite our long-standing tradition of hospitality and asylum. Over 2 years of the devastating war in Sudan have turned our